And so, members, let me on your behalf welcome Pesul and the team from water in general. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting discussion on water. Everyone, it's one of those, as I say, water is life, eh? So, so what I'm going to suggest, members, is Pierce, I would turn it over to you if there's anything you'd like to say as a general, and what you can probably do, Pierce, is to introduce who will take the lead at Water Resources Authority, NWC, and Rural Water Supply. My suggestion, members, is that we take it in the order that it is given. If PS so, well, I leave it up to you. We have it here, Water Resources Authority, National Water Commission, Rural Water Supply. Yes, but I leave it up to you to indicate how you would like the proceedings. We are, sometimes we get the smaller ones out, but we leave it up to you. And to introduce the principles, and then as we reach them, they can then speak. They can introduce the other members of their team. So that, P.S., I turn it over
Thank
to
you, Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee, support staff, and colleagues from the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. We are here this morning from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, and the focus is on the water entities, National Water Commission, Rural Water Supply Limited, and Water Resources Authority. With me from the ministry proper are Mrs. Judith Rob Walters, she's the Principal Finance Officer, Mrs. Arlene Williams, Senior Director, Water Policy and Monitoring, Mrs. Talia Gibson, Director, Water Monitoring, and Ms. Monique Gibbs, Senior Director, Strategic Planning and Evaluation. From the National Water Commission is the President, Mr. Mark Barnett, Rural Water Supply Limited, Mr. Audley Thompson, and Water Resources Authority, Mr. Herbert Thomas. And as you have said, Chairman, when they speak, they will introduce their support team.
All right. Before we go into the agencies, I notice here at the ministry itself that you had just indicated that you have a Senior Director of Water Policy and Monitoring, directors, corporate directors, Senior Director Strategic Planning, etc. You have a team there that deals with water in general from the ministry. Maybe you could start by sort of just educating us, just for us to understand how it operates. In other words, all of us, yes, no, and in other words, this is obviously something which there's some policy that then directs the different agencies, I suspect. So just to give us an idea of how
the ministry
and
operates.
what the general policy would be, or what the elements of it that they would determine are.
Well, the water policy, monitoring and policy unit within the ministry has responsibility for ensuring that there is support to the various entities and that the government's policy on water is properly articulated and effectively implemented through the agencies. So they provide support. They are responsible for doing research, assessments, reviews. Currently, they are in the process of finalizing the water policy so that it may come to Parliament. It went to Cabinet already. It underwent review by a subcommittee of Cabinet, and adjustments are being made based on feedback from Cabinet. OUR is being consulted, after which we expect to table it in Parliament. So the water policy will very soon, in the next calendar year, the beginning of the next financial year, should be here for Parliament to look at it and to give us feedback.
But just in a general sense, not going into it until it's stable, but what, as opposed to rural water and NWC that we know well, the water policy, what does it deal with? Like the price of water or the debt or the or relationships? Yes. What really does it?
The availability, accessibility for the general population, and what are some of the strategies that are being recommended to ensure that there is proper water, potable water available to the population, and what systems and support the government will put in place to ensure that there's proper distribution of water to the population.
Okay. All right. Members, are there any other clarification from the ministry? Or we can move on. So, PS, you want us to take it in the order? Well, the order.
Or I'll take it in your order, sir. We'll take it in your order.
Well, on the agenda we have here Water Resources Authority, so maybe we can proceed.
So Mr. Thomas will.
All right, Mr. Thomas, and welcome. And I think maybe as a start, what you can do generally is just indicate to members, just in an overview, what it is that the authority really does, and any challenges you have or updates, and then we can go into more detail.
Okay, Chairman, thank you very much. Good morning, members. And let me introduce my team. I have here with me the Deputy Managing Director, Mr. Peter Clark.
Morning, Chairman. That's the team.
Peter.
Okay, no.
Yeah, okay. The Water Resource Authority is the agency of government that has the responsibility for the management of water resources. And when we say the management of water resources, we are talking about the water resources allocation, water resources protection, water resources monitoring, and one of our key functions really is that we develop the water resources master plan, which provides guidance. It's a framework for water resources development. Essentially what that master plan does is that it determines the available water resources in all of Jamaica. Jamaica is divided into various units. We call them watershed management units, of which there are 26. And for each of those units, what we do is make a determination of the available surface and groundwater. We also make a determination of all the demands, the sectoral demands, domestic, agricultural, tourism, and we reconcile the difference between availability and demand, and based on that, we can make recommendation as to where you have surplus, where you have excess, and where we make recommendation as to where you could be moving from to address the issues of water resources. In addition to that, we also provide some technical support to other agencies, for example, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management as it relates to disaster management. So we provide information on flooding. We have a pilot flood warning system in the Rio Cobre, and we are seeking to expand flood forecasting island-wide pending the passing of the revision to the Flood Water Control Act, which will give us the regulatory function. And of course, the Works Agency will take care of the works aspect of it. Also, we provide technical support to other agencies. For example, the Works Agencies, as it relates to dimension of all hydrologic structures, we provide them with information as to the peak flows so that those structures can be adequately designed to facilitate the flows through and not cause problem. So essentially, we are a regulator. We have a permit and license system through which we issue license for the abstraction and use of surface and groundwater. That system really is a regulatory tool to ensure that we don't over-abstract. We don't over-abstract from the aquifer nor from the river so as to secure the integrity of the water resources. So in a nutshell, that is pretty much what we do. Presently, we do have, as it relates to challenge, we have an issue with the cadre of staff to carry out that function because we keep losing staff over the years. We are in the process now of a reclassification being now conducted by the Ministry of Finance, which we hope will address some of the problem. But most recently, one of our senior staff recently employed, and it's one post that we keep losing the staff there quite often, which is our water resources engineer, and we have lost that person. That person will be leaving at the end of this month, and that kind of will put us in a setback because once the Flood Water Control Act common stream, that is the person who we anticipated would have been leading the process, and that is a person who has been very instrumental thus far in terms of input to the policy revision.
Member Cameron.
Morning, Mr. Thomas. Morning, team. I have a little concern in that I've heard what you've outlined as your mandate. And what is your view as to what is happening in the St. Catherine Plains? If my understanding of the data which I see published is correct, it suggests that salt water is seeping back into the aquifers on the St. Catherine Plains. That presently you are abstracting so much water from that area, sending it to southern St. Catherine, that the aquifers have become really saline. It's really very salty. If that is so, can you tell us what are the immediate plans to replenish those aquifers with fresh water?
That is really not the case in totality. Over a period of years, you would have had areas of the aquifers in St. Catherine saline as a result of overpumping. And what has been done is, I don't know if you're familiar with or is aware of the artificial recharge program that was established by the National Water Commission. It was supposed to have been part of a condition laid down by the WRA on which they could have conducted further abstraction from the aquifer. And they have installed such a system for actually recharging the aquifer. And that recharge process is supposed to, with time, move the saline front out and to improve the water quality in the area. But while there are some areas where the water quality could have been saline. There's no large-scale movement of saline water into the aquifer as such.
But if you have the rate of abstraction being higher than the rate of recharge, do you foresee in 5 years that all reaching that point where it is going to affect our agriculture and all the related activities which depend on water? I have a serious issue with that.
Right. So we would have established a threshold rate of abstraction above which, and that is what the licensing process facilitates. And once we recognize that we have reached a threshold level, then what has been done is that the area would have been declared, a moratorium would have been declared on that area for no further abstraction, which is what obtains for several areas in the St. Catherine area. So what will happen, for existing wells, you can use that water, but there will be no additional license given for any further abstraction in the area. So that is how we have been managing and controlling the water quality, and we don't anticipate, we are expecting improvement in the future in the water quality based on what we are doing as it relates to both the artificial recharge program and the permit and licensing system.
Which takes me to this point. Is there any equity in terms of the granting of licenses? Because the licenses seems to rest with the suppliers who are supplying Southern St. Catherine. How do you propose to bring some equity into the system in terms of those people who reside take for instance the Geisel area? They're on the cusp of the water moving north, and they have, for the better part, no supplies. How do you propose, well, what is it that you've done to assist all of those people who live, say, in the money running along that belt into St. Mary? Because I have a little difficulty because for the
but
in terms of the granting of licenses.
Yes, right. We don't have a response for the supply, but as it relates to the granting of license, there is equity in the system, because the Act requires that when you submit an application for a license, you have to, first of all, advertise that proposal in the newspaper, at the post office, in the community, and if there are any objection from anybody whatsoever, we then take that into consideration. We also, as the agency, would advise all the other agencies that are involved with water supply or any other aspect of water, or even the environmental agencies, to say that this person has indicated an interest in abstracting water. And then once there is an objection, then the board will meet and there will be a deliberation on it, and then the decision will be taken as to whether or not that license will be given. So that is the system that is in place.
Let me ask you, because as I understand it, you have a study. You indicated in some of the correspondence I saw that you were conducting a study of the Rio Cobre Valley. And that study was to have been completed sometime in October of last year. Is it complete?
That study is not by Water Resources. I suspect that is by the National Water Commission.
And you have no part to play in the data collection and the analysis or anything.
We would provide a lot of that data. We would be involved in the review of some of the findings of that report. Yeah.
Well, could you help me? Which area do you designate as the Rio Cobre, the valley?
The Rio Cobre is all of that area that actually drains to the Rio Cobre River. So it's stretched from part of Portmore all the way up into sections of Monique, into Ewaton, into Glengough, into
parts of St. Mary and St. Andrew.
Yes, right, those border areas. So in terms of a watershed, it's like it's right where you have the peak of those hillsides. Mm-hmm.
Right, but you say you're part of the study.
Yes, we contribute to the study. Yes, we provide data, yes, and we review as well.
And what I want to find out, do you know whether or not that study is at a place now where you can tell us what it is that will be done for those areas that are not presently served from the Rio Cobre supplies?
Well, like I've said, as it relates to the service and supply that is outside of our mandate, that could best be addressed by the NWC.
Mr. Chairman, I must first declare an interest in this matter as a member of Parliament. Much of what my colleague from Northeast St. Catherine.
Because you're the person in South St. Catherine that's taking up all the water?
No, I share his concerns
Okay.
for what is not happening and what is not likely to happen. The Water Resource Authority, as I understand it. By the way, Mr. Chairman, when elected first in 1994, the first parliamentary committee I served on was one that brought the Water Resources Authority into being. So I have a very intimate relationship in that piece of legislation and what it set out to do from then to now, which is primary, is to protect the water resource asset of the country as best as possible. In a nutshell, that's one of the primary objectives of that legislation, and by extension, the question, the issues raised by Mr. Thomas is very close to me. The local interest on which I declare, which is the southern St. Catherine Plain, for which my colleague made mention of. The former, your predecessor, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Fernandez, which is deemed to be the Dean of Water Resource Management in Jamaica, and if not in the region, made a pronouncement on the proposed Bernard Lodge New City development. And in a nutshell, says that that proposal, my word, is madness, because the water required for the proposed 17,000 house, you're going to be destroying the aquifers there, etc., etc. Now, for many years, there have been proposed development on much of the Bernard Lodge lands, and that was rejected by NEPA because of the reasons proffered by WRA, protecting the aquifers, protecting the agricultural prospect along the plains, etc., etc. Of course, the light industrial demand for water and so forth would be severely compromised. Out of the ministry that you report to, there is proposal for this new city without resolving the adequacy of the water available in that area. Currently, in that plain, there's a shortage. Greater Portmore, Elsha, all of that area has been suffering from water shortage for a number of years. 2 years ago, in March 2016, Mr. Fernandez referred to applications being made for housing development, which were denied for this very same reason. Now I am seeing where there is a mad speed to proceed with this housing development in that area, which will demand water supply for those that propose 17,000 houses plus a light industrial development. It seems like between NEPA, particularly NEPA, which falls under your ministry, Madam PS, just flip position. All of a sudden, the water resource adequacy we had a miracle. So all that Mr. Fernandez was talking about, as early as March this year, or rather as late as March this year, all of a sudden vanished. And you can build houses on it. I want to know how you reconcile that position as early as March, by the data, and I won't get into the technical side of it because the experts got into it and made the point translated for lay persons like ourselves. Since March this year, when Mr. Fernandez publicly made that declaration, the ministry is proceeding at dead speed, at gunboat speed, probably, what is faster than sonic sound for the development. And Mr. Chairman, why it is of concern to me? Because against that background, the ministry, you're a ministry, Madam Pierce, not you personally. I know you get caught in the middle, right? The ministry is proceeding to sell lands for the development even before the plan is complete, even before the work is complete. I know of sales agreements that are down the road already with personnel, with persons.
With my ministry or MICA? Whichever.
Entities under your ministry.
NLA. But
yes.
They may be holding them.
Sugar Company, SCJ. What the government has done is to take all the lands around the area that was with other entities like Land Agency and amass them under SCJ. So they have total control of the lands. And then to propose to use the Housing Act to do the development and circumvent all of the other intervening entities. Mr. Chairman, I raise it because as Member of Parliament, it affects me. Because right now as I speak, people who I represent can't get water. It is a question of proper planning. We want houses. And we want water for the people who live it, because at the end of the day, when those houses are built, and the water supply is inadequate, and those innocent buyers, as what has happened in Sandil Vista in Elsha, where the houses were built with the commitment that the water will be there, and everybody have to get black tank put on them houses because the water was not delivered. As a matter of fact, notwithstanding all the promises and commitment that were made. And at the end of the day, I as Member of Parliament have to deal with that reality because they become my residents. Coupled with that, it compounds the adequacy of water supply for the existing residents of Elsha, Greater Portmore, and that entire plain. That is the consequence of what I call bankrupt planning. It is not abstract, it is not esoteric, Mr. Chairman, it is real, because the residents there are living it. And when they come with all kind of fancy explanation, it doesn't remove the fact that the residents are suffering from the inconveniences of not having adequate and reliable water supply. The WRA is a critical entity in managing the resources. NEPA ought to work in conjunction with WRA in giving the approvals. And what I'm seeing, Mr. Chairman, that bothers me, worry me, and worry the people living in Greater Portmore, living in Elsha, living all over Portmore, is how their quality of their lives are going to deteriorate because of inadequate planning. And not to mention, Mr. Chairman, the impact of this development and in other areas such as roadways, sewage disposal capacity, which all of that has not been fully assessed and determined yet before a plan is being executed. It's like putting the cart before the horse. And why I'm even more worried, Mr. Chairman, is I know that the government has proceeded with selective persons to sell them large tracts of land over there. And the whole process of even making the land available has not been transparent. Because I know of many developers and other small individuals who have wanted those very same lands for development in Portmore, never had the opportunity. And you have a set of people who are now coming to acquire the lands to develop houses because it is cheaper as a developer to build on those low lands and sell it. And the people's lives are going to be made worse. And I want the WRA, I want NEPA to exercise professionalism. I want the NWC I'm not certain if the NWC even have signed off on that in terms of the adequacy of water for that, which I'd like them to speak to also, because it speaks to the role of the management of our water resources to make the lives of our people better rather than convenient for some people to make some money.
Members, I have member Stewart and member Vaz, but is it on, there's a discussion that is sort of centered in St. Catherine now. I'm wondering if member Daly wanted to say something, if maybe we can sort of, member Daly, it has to do with this issue.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Chairman,
but please.
sorry, I just wanted to find out if a response is required from the committee.
No, absolutely. Well, certainly. Let me make a suggestion. Member Daly, I think this is really dealing with the issue with the St. Catherine Plains now. So I would take member Daly first, so that when you respond, you can capture everything at one time. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Sorry, Member Daly, I don't know if your mic is working. You want to, Member Dalrymple, if you can no, just move it across.
I'm concerned about the White Mall area because I'm told that most of the development that is taking place in regards to the water, the improvement of water, will not be in that area, none at all. It will be going to Portmore. So I was surprised to hear my colleague. However, White Mall, who is supplying the water, have no water at all. We have Caymanas Bay, we have Glade, and we have even areas in Windsor Heights where the water is going to be taken from to go to Portmore. And those people are suffering as we speak in regard to getting water. So I would like to find out what is I want to know what is the rationale behind all of this. We having water in our area, but that water cannot stay in the area. It is going to go to somebody else's area, while the constituency and its environment have no water. So I would like to know what is the rationale and where water is going to come from now to be able to supply those citizens in those areas.
Okay, Mr. Thomas.
Yes, okay. Again, I need to make it quite clear as to exactly what is our mandate. Because we are operating at the level where at the macro level for the WRA. We determine how much water is available in the various areas, in the various units into which the country is divided. And once we have made that determination, how much is in the groundwater storage, how much is in the surface water storage, and once we are able to also determine the availability compared to what is demand, this information is then made available to those who are now responsible for the supply side. We don't supply water, right? We provide information as to water resource availability. As it relates to the area over in Bernard Lodge, it is a fact that there are challenges as it relates to the groundwater in terms of water resource availability. What has happened, and I think this is where the study is at currently, a number of wells that were in production for agriculture are no longer in agriculture, right? So the question now is to actually look at those wells, which is what we are doing presently, to see, based on those wells, how much additional water could be made available. There's also the other aspect which the NWC is looking at to see what can be done with respect to taking water from the Rio Cobre and to replace that water taken from the Rio Cobre by water from sewage return, treated sewage, which now presently go to Soberry. So that is part of the whole mix as it relates to trying to best utilize the available water resources. So I can say, yes, there is still some further refining needs to be done in terms of what is our net available water resource for domestic needs, given the fact that a number of agricultural lands would have changed the use from agriculture to now domestic. There's also another point which I need to bring to the fore, and that is that area of land that was considered to be a very, very productive aquifer over in the Bernard Lodge area was in fact being supported, sustained by irrigation excess. So the high groundwater that we used to feel happy about, once the irrigation, once the sugarcane production ceased, then all of that recharge from the excess irrigation ceased as well. And so therefore what we found is that the levels started moving down. And in addition to that, a drain that was cut there in support of the housing in Portmore, that drain actually contributed to actually moving the groundwater levels down. So the aquifer that we speak highly about was never a sustainable aquifer. Because once you change that land use from the agriculture there, from sugarcane, where the means of irrigation was flooding irrigation, you just flooded with water from the river, from the canal, or whatever it is. And once you would have changed the land use, then you would have been significantly reducing that irrigation, that recharge to the aquifer. The recommendation made to NEPA as it relates to whatever developments, because initially we had looked at just a few developments, and the recommendation made was that there were a number of things that could have been done to facilitate recharge. So we look at things like detention ponds and retention ponds. We look at various other things that we actually submitted that one would want to consider so as to facilitate some form of a recharge to the aquifer. But the aquifer itself was never a sustainable aquifer. It was dependent a whole lot on you flooding it with the irrigation for sugarcane cultivation.
Yes. Member Campbell has a follow-up, and I think Member Daly has a follow-up as well.
Mr. Thomas, as part of the mix, because I look at the several millions of gallons of water which run north. I see we have this amazing capacity of converting fresh water into salt water. Because that's what, in practical terms, what happens. All the water which is running north, it runs to the sea. As part of the mix, have you contemplated running that water back, say you come north, move north to south, take that water and I'd say drop it in some place like Yuaton. I have in my headspace something like a hydro plant, and then using the water from that plant to recharge. I'm very concerned, and I have some self-interest because I represent an area which falls in that, and I'm very, very worried that agriculture, which is part of the mainstay, is just slowly dying, and people are moving away, and the communities are dying, partly because there is no water, among other things. But I believe that part of the issues we are having could be solved by us moving some of that water, which is going into the sea, back in south. I don't know if that is part of.
Yes, that has been a message of mine for many, many years, and I must say that at this point I'm happy that the present policy does in fact look at this whole issue of interbasin transfer, because what the data would have shown, and it's not showing it just now, is that whereas the water resources is almost evenly divided to the north and to the south of Jamaica, because you know the backbone mountain running from east to west, Blue Mountain run across, kind of divide the country into two halves, the north and the south. The north you speak about. The available water is pretty evenly distributed, 50-50 north and south. But what is happening is that on the south, the demand for that water is maybe about 10 times greater than on the north, because this is where you have the bulk of your agricultural lands, the bulk of your industries, and the bulk of that. So we have always been saying that what you need to have in place is the infrastructure to be able to address that. Because for all water resources problem, whether it is too little or too much, the solution can be, it's pretty well the same. If it's too much, then you're going to move people away from the water, move water away from people. That's in case of flooding. If it's too little, you're going to move people to where the water is, right? Or if you're not going to move the people where the water is, you're going to move the water where the demands are, right? But it just so happens that as it relates to the too little, moving the demands to where the water is not practical. You can't move agricultural land. You have to have the infrastructure in place to move that water. Well, sadly, that is outside of our ambit. We don't have that responsibility. But we provide the information to say that this is a solution. So, but like I've said, it is now a part of the policy. The policy recognizes that, and the policy will speak to having that done, having that addressed.
Mr. Thomas, I think just as a follow-on, we always hear these terms, reverse osmosis and all these things, which is to take the salt water back to. Is there any scope for things like this, given the discussion taking place?
Well, for me, I think there is scope, but I think at this time, because it's fairly expensive, but I don't think at this time we are at that stage. And I say that because presently, when you look at our available water resources, our total demand, I mean island-wide, our total demand is probably less than 50% of the available water resources.
It's just to capture it and process it.
Right. The problem that we have is the whole distribution, like I've explained, the demand, availability, distribution.
And PS, that is what, as I take it, that would be a major part of what the policy addresses.
Yes.
And there was a lot of discussion about a dam in the Rio Cobra and all these sort of things. Those are no longer discussions. I'm just wondering within the policy and all that. I think they're going to flood out Member Campbell.
Yeah, I think there are a number of issues associated with the damming of the Rio Cobra.
Yeah, I just wondering if it was still, I'd heard discussions about it, but okay. Members, yes, I'm going to, members, I'm going to, I'd allowed Member Daly to come in. Right, I don't know. Remember, no, I really want to move on now. I have Member Stewart and Vaz. You want to just take it and then we just take it? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Oh.
Done?
Yeah, but like I've said, that is a utility issue. It is not a matter of. Yes, it's a supply issue. It's NWC.
I think, no, let me tell you, Member Daly, we're taking the water resources. Mike, please.
If I am confused, you imagine the ordinary people out there. Everything that you want to speak about is somebody else's portfolio.
Yeah.
The people don't want to know about portfolio, they want to know about their water out there. So I would love for somebody to give me some answers so that I'll be able to take back something out there, because it's a serious issue. The NWC man is here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Member Daly, yes, we're taking the Water Resource Authority first, and then we're going to move on to NWC as quickly as possible. All right.
Thank you, Chairman. My question was really a follow-up to what Member Campbell was asking.
Sure, but you can.
The policy we speak of, that's the same master plan that you guys are putting together?
No, the master plan is somewhat different.
The master plan is different?
Yes, yeah.
All right, my question really was with regards to the conservation and distribution, because as he said, a lot of water is going away in the sea, but as you mentioned, it has to do with infrastructural development to really distribute it properly.
Capture.
So I was trying to think of, in that same master plan that is being done, is there a timeline that is being set where you think would be at this point, where the water that is conserved in a particular area that has too much to be distributed to those areas that don't have any or don't have enough? I just want to have an idea what type of timeline are we looking at for us to really get to where we really want to go, and what time period also you're looking at to complete that same master plan, which I would hope would include all of these concerns that we're asking now.
Yeah. 2030. Okay, the master plan completion is... Oh, the policy, the water sector policy is 2030 for completion, I understand. The master plan should be completed by the end of next year, right? But the master plan, it could be a misnomer, really. Because, like I've said, all that master plan is addressing is providing you with information as to how much water is available from one place to the other. What is the demand in the locale, the demand for the various industries, and where do you have a surplus? Where do you have deficiency? Right. It may not tell you how you move, right? Because those are now engineering consideration. One would have to sit, discuss, and agree, right, and financial, and agree on the solution. But it provides you the information as to your resource availability, your demands, right? Where you have shortfalls, where you have deficit. That is essentially what the plan is about. So maybe the term plan is a misnomer. But that should be ready by the end of next year. The demand component is already finished, is already completed. The resource inventory is now being revised, and the resource inventory will also incorporate the climate change component.
All right. Members, I think that a lot of the questions is an overlap. What the authority does is really sort of map out the availability or the actual water resources that we have in the country. Now, having done that, the Water Commission then harnesses it and takes it. So a lot of the questions we're going to be hitting the NWC. I think a lot of the questions are for NWC, so we're going to go there shortly. I just want to know if there are any other questions. I have member Stewart and member Dunn and member. All right, so go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions for Mr. Thomas. Mm-hmm. He mentioned in his own remarks the fact that he has been having a very high turnover. What would you say are the factors that contribute to the high turnover of your engineers and other personnel? And then secondly, the parish of Manchester is noted for a lack of water, and in particular South Manchester. The citizens there, the farmers, have languished long and hard for many, many years. What plans are being put in place to alleviate the suffering of these hard-working and committed people, constituency that I represent?
I just want to put a little context in terms of the high turnover of the engineers. When I took up office at Economic Growth and Job Creation, it was brought to my attention that they were losing highly technical staff. You would appreciate that it's a highly specialized area, hydrologists, etc., etc. So we made representation to the Ministry of Finance because the salaries really are not competitive to retain the staff, the specialists particularly. And they did an interim adjustment of the salaries, just as a holding position for them. Well, I don't think you had major changes then in terms of staff leaving, but they've moved now into the next phase, which is to do a general reclassification. We are hopeful that with the reclassification, they would do research to find out what is being paid to such persons, because we're not losing them locally as much as internationally. And we are hoping that with the reclassification, they will be in a better position where we can retain those persons, because without them, it makes no sense to have the organization. And the Ministry of Finance, we made a strong case, and as I said, they did make some interim adjustments and are now in full-scale reclassification of those positions.
Oh, Manchester, you would ask about the issue with the farmers not having water.
Yes, and in particular South Manchester.
Mm-hmm. And again, that is a utility supply issue, NIC and NWC. Mm.
Mr. Barnett will respond.
When we get to end, which was the point I was making earlier. Mm. All right, Member Dunn.
And thank you very much, Chairman. Member Jackson mentioned earlier the concern he has about the developments that are going to take place in a particular area, which of course I support development generally. But one of the answer that you gave him with regards to the recharge facilities, that when it was agricultural lands, then the irrigation system that they had at that time, the flooding of the plains, contributed quite a bit to the aquifers there. Question is there any plans for this large-scale development to have these recharge points, so at least they can benefit from the natural flow of water from the land when there's rain, and it can contribute to the aquifers?
Yeah, that was a recommendation to NEPA, that a lot of these areas could have been reserved for detention or retention ponds, so that when you have excess rain, then it could be collecting some of these things for a recharge to the aquifer rather than just flowing straight off the sea. And it would also be a way of actually controlling flooding as well. So that was part of the recommendation.
Member Clark. Member Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask through you to Mr. Thomas. For the St. James area, what are your recommendations as it relates to the Great River, lower and upper, which is from the Seven Rivers area, and the lower section, which is from the border of St. James in that area, and also the Trelawney, Marthabury River, being that those two rivers are the two surface water that supplies St. James heavily. Considering the fact that we are having a great influx of commercial water, is your mapping how, or what is your recommendation as to where would get the additional water from?
Marthabury, I think, has more capacity. Rio Bueno has a tremendous amount of capacity. And I'm almost sure that Great River would have some more capacity as well. So as it relates to the supply, like I keep saying, whereas we can provide with the amount of water that's available, as it relates to the system for actually supplying, I can't speak to that.
So
Yes.
just as a follow-on to what was said, in all of these cases, the NWC pumps are usually quite close to the sea. They're lower down rather than higher up, aren't they? Well, for the most part, Great River and Marthabury. So anything you're pumping out is, if you don't get it, is going to be lost to the sea. It's not like you're doing a lot of environmental damage or losing a lot to the aquifer or anything, because it's now in the end stages. So if you increase the capacity of pumping in those, it wouldn't have a negative effect, really. A question.
Yeah, if you are close to the sea, well, that would be correct. If you are close, but I don't think all your systems are close to the sea. Mm-hmm.
Well, then they should be, eh?
Pardon me?
They should be. I'm saying if they aren't, in terms of planning, it would be better if they were.
Well,
I don't know. I'm asking the questions. I mean, there are maybe other factors,
yeah,
but it would be good to know what those would be.
I am not an engineer in that sense, but I would figure that there will be other constraints, or topographic as to where it's located.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
the real burning part of it now for us, Mr. Chairman, is to get NWC into the mix of things now, sir, because now that we have gotten...
I think you're correct. So, members, with your permission, thank you, Mr. Oh, sorry, I
wanted. I'm following up on Dr.
No,
question regarding the. I just want, in simple terms, Mr. Thomas, the answer you gave to Mr. Dunn. Is it a condition of the housing development or just a suggestion from WRA? For your answer, my understanding is that for NEPA's approval for the housing development, it will be contingent upon the adequacy of the water resources.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
In light of your response to Dr. Dunn, are you saying that if those approvals are to be made by NEPA, it would be contingent on those conditions that you just outlined in your response?
Conditions as it relates to, yes, water for storage.
For the development of the scope, those provisions have to be made.
Yes.
And is that in writing to NEPA?
Yes, but it was as it relates to 5 or so development in the Bernard Lodge area, specific areas.
Could we get a copy of that? I'll tell you why I'm asking for it. I have a document from NEPA in respect to, I have it, just earlier this year, and they declined the approval by those housing development. I think it's about 3 different sites, right? I can provide it to the committee as a reference. And if NEPA did that this year, I have a problem appreciating how NEPA would be going ahead with a proposal for 17,000 houses in the same plane. So I will provide a copy of that document. I would like a copy of that, the committee get a copy of that document you referred to, sent to NEPA, regarding these conditions for their proposed development of the Bernard Lodge City.
Member Jackson, I want to go a step further because I think it's something that I have great concerns myself about. Who issues? If I want to do a housing development wherever, I have to meet certain, even a subdivision, I have to have certain conditions. And one of those has to do with supply of water. So if I want to build 500 houses, I think at the root of it, we always see NEPA as the person, but it must be informed by your availability of water. So the question directly is it you as an authority that knows how much water is available in the basin in the general terms, or is it the NWC? Who is it that NEPA would get approval from with regard to availability of water?
Well, our recommendation to NEPA would be to ensure that there is water, so NEPA would now have to check with the NWC.
No, let me go further.
Yes.
That's understood. But let's say you want to do something in Red Hills, Mandeville, a development of 1,000 houses, whatever. You have to now seek approval. A condition has to be the availability of water. The question is it you who specifically, do you see these plans? Do you have to give your approval, or is it the NWC that gives approval?
We don't give up. We give approval for securing the integrity of the water resources. We ensure that you don't pollute the water and you don't over-abstract. That is largely what we're about. As it relates to the availability of water, we will recommend to NEPA we will say that, okay, based on our assessment here.
So you're saying when I make an application for subdivision and to build 1,000 houses, it comes to you?
It goes to NEPA. NEPA sends to us. We are the supporting agencies.
It comes to you?
Yes, it comes to us.
And you have to, so do you ever turn it down?
No, we can't turn down application. No, we make recommendation to NEPA. We can't turn down anything.
Okay.
It is NEPA who has that responsibility.
So in terms of turning it down, if water is not available, then it would have to be NWC, if that is the case.
Yes, NEPA would have to say, well, it's not. Yes.
Okay. So we will be talking to NWC next, so we can pursue that a little more. All right. So members, with that, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm going to now move to National Water Commission. Mr. Barnett, welcome.
Mr. Thomas, you'll send a copy of the correspondence to
yes,
the
correspondence with regard
to the condition.
To the conditions.
The recommendations.
The recommendations. Yes. It may be for all the recent developments in major developments in St. Catherine.
It is not for all. It was for 5 specific things. 5 specific.
Fine.
Yes.
Fine.
Yeah, that's what we
and Mr. Chairman, I just for the record want to say, I indicated because I have an interest as the MP for one of the area, but it's not just for South St. Catherine.
No, it's for
the entire plains, because even the corporate area, water is shared. That would supply that plain. It's shared with the corporate area. It is something that will affect the entire Kingston metropolitan area and their quality of life.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, Mr. Barnett, welcome. And I'll give you an opportunity to introduce your team and to give any opening remarks that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. First of all, let me express our appreciation in the invitation to this committee so we can give a little bit more first-hand information on the things that we are doing at NWC and to more or less discuss some of the things that are happening. So with me this morning I'm going to start with the only rose amongst the thorns is Mrs. Donette Henry. She's a manager for business planning and research. Beside him is Mr. Michael Dunn. I think he's no stranger to members of the committee, Vice President, Eastern Division. In front of Mr. Dunn is Mr. Vernon Barrett, Vice President, Investment and Performance Monitoring at NWC. And beside Mr. Dunn, Mr. Garrett Jackson, Vice President, Engineering and Capital Projects, and last but not least, Mr. Kevin Carr, Vice President, Western Division. I'm just going to briefly, Mr. Chairman, just give a little bit of overview rather, of some of the activities and some of the things that we at NWC are doing. And I know initially the first order and discussion will be just about distribution system projects, but I just want to outline as part of our 4 corporate objectives, really are looking at how do we grow revenue and make more cash available to the NWC, how do we improve our operational efficiency, how do we improve our commercial operations and public image. And last but by no means the least is how do we improve and build staff capacity within the NWC. So we have a number of activities and it would have been informed by our operational plan that would have been approved for 2018-19. And in that plan, we have quite a number of activities that we are pursuing. One of the major activities for the NWC is how do we address the impact on our balance sheet as it relates to, one, our pension liability, especially our unfunded pension obligations. Mr. Chairman, one of the things that the NWC has faced over the years is we currently have, based on the last actuarial valuation as at March 31st, 2018, and in keeping with International Accounting Standard number 19, a unfunded pension liability of just about $19.5 billion. Now the question that is going to be asked is, how am I going to address that? And one of the things that we are currently pursuing within the NWC is a comprehensive pension reform that, that will impact all members of staff. In other words, all members of staff will be required to contribute to their pension. But before we get there, there's a number of activities that has to be done. First, we have to look at and amend the NWC current act, which does not speak to contributory and compulsory contribution to employees' pension. But that will just address current situation. There is a past liability that has to be funded. And under the current arrangement, the government of Jamaica, through the Ministry of Finance, had advised us that NWC would have to look at strategies, approaches as to how we address that past liability. And one of the easiest things for us is how can we, over time, reduce that liability to make pension be an operation all by itself to take care of those future commitments. So we're looking at monetizing some of our land assets, and where we would have land that would not necessarily be considered to either in the future to be integral to our operations, we are going to divest those as a means of starting to provide some level of investment to address some of this deficit. So that's a big issue. And just to point out, pension, all our employees who are pensionable at this moment is a pay-as-you-go. So whenever time we collect our revenue on a monthly basis, that's the means by which those employees are paid, and it is paid strictly from the tariff that we collect on a monthly basis. However, that's not sustainable in the scheme of things. We have a number of other activities that we are pursuing, and some of them has been raised as questions today to my colleague. We recognize, especially within the, I want to say, the KMA, Kingston Metropolitan Area, which really encompasses, as far as we're concerned, the KSA, Kingston and St. Andrew, Spanish Town, Portmore, as a key distribution commercial area. And one of the things that we have commenced in the last 3 years is to look seriously what is the available water resource required to sustain and to really satisfy the activities within these areas. And we look at what is it we're supplying. Currently, at that time in Kingston, we assess the demand to be just about 55 imperial million gallons of water per day. However, as it is already known, NWC has a very high NRW. And therefore, when you look at the strategic decision taken then was to focus on an area that has the highest demand. The volume save is going to be significant. And so we are pursuing and continue to pursue for the next, next 2 years, the non-revenue water activity, centrally focusing on Kingston and St. Andrew. And we can report, Chairman, that since the commencement of that activity, when we did our baseline assessment, NRW was just about 60-61% of production. And since we have engaged our consulting entity who are working alongside with NWC staff in transferring knowledge, we have seen NRW now on a rolling month average down to 48%. We believe that is a tremendous undertaking considering the nature of the project, and projects of these type are usually executed over 10 years. We are trying to push it in 5. And so our next move is, how do we tackle NRW in the other areas that would have been adequately supplied based on production capacity, but distribution-wise, infrastructure network-wise, is creating its challenge for us. So the next order of business for us on that, in that area, and in fact which we consider as a critical strategic activity in helping the NWC to turn around its fortunes, is reduction of non-revenue water. And we are looking to go into Portmore as an area, and I know Member Jackson has raised that, and as well as on the north coast because of the adequacy of production capacity. But as again, the losses are much more than what is acceptable. And just to indicate, you may ask what would be an acceptable level of NRW. It all would depend on where you are globally, but we have assessed the optimum and economic value of NRW would be 30% as being the maximum level of production capacity, meaning it would make sense, rather than spend $1 to do NRW, to do some other intervention, because the returns would now start to be declining. So 30% would be is considered the optimum.
So just for the record, you're saying that you're always going to have some non-revenue water, but how much of our water supply now is non-revenue?
Currently, on average, island-wide, we are just about 70%. It fluctuates on a monthly basis. It fluctuates between 60 something.
70% of the water that you produce, you collect no revenue for it.
That's correct. And that's very high.
And that's twice what is optimum for you. So basically, the 30% that you do collect has to pay the cost of the production of the 100%.
We want to put it in a context, Chairman, because one of the things that we have to be mindful of, a water supply network will always have losses. And so it is not going to be a case where we're going to have zero losses. It is part of the network. So our effort is to actually...
No, I understand. You were saying that that level should be about 30%.
Right, yeah. That's where our target is.
All right, are you...
So one of the things that we also have to understand, Chairman, is NRW is made up of a number of factors, or constituents, if you will, or components. And one of them is, yes, theft. One of them is leaky pipe. And there's always the misconception that leaky pipes are is a major contributor, but not necessarily in all cases and all location is the major contributor. Theft is a major contributor. On the registration of meter is a major contributor. When we issue flat bills to customers is a contributor, because invariably one person is getting 2,000 gallons per month. There's no incentive for that person to conserve because there's no meter on that supply. And that is one of the reasons why we have taken the decision to go with full 100% metering in our effort. And so primarily informing us entering into a 5-year contract with German metering company deal for 450,000 solid state meters. And there's a lot of other discussion that we can have as to why we have gone solid state meters versus the other type of meters. Notwithstanding, for some communities, we are not going to install the solid state meters, but we are going to be installing the regular conventional mechanical meters, especially in some rural communities and some special supply zones that we would have established. So,
all right. Well, clarification. All right.
In that 70%, Mr. Barnett, the NWC must have a breakout of the different category of losses, like under-metering, theft, leak, etc. Could you give us a picture?
So we categorize it in two broad areas, Member Jackson, and we have physical losses and commercial losses. Commercial losses are the ones that we would... Right, so I'm getting there. In terms of the specific components, I don't have that information now, but if you take it in the broad heading physical and commercial, it is just about 40-60, meaning just about 40% of the losses would be commercial losses, meaning the under registration, the theft, etc., unauthorized access, and just about 60% would be considered are the physical losses, meaning leaky pipes that you may see are not seen, overflowing tanks when they do occur. Those are the type of physical system loss, as I'm reminded you would be thinking of. But I can give you a chart, especially for cases, since as we have that on a running monthly assessment of the different components that makes up the overall NRW. Yeah.
Mr. Barnett, before, I want to just go back to where we left in the previous conversation. And I think certainly there are two questions that I'd like to ask with regard to that. The first is that all of us here represent people, and there are certain things you want. You know, we always want more roads, water, street lights, housing. All these things are positive. But one of the difficulties we have is that as the communities grow, you know, many of us who have been there for years, we're putting the actual pipes into the communities. But as these communities grow and then you get NHT building a housing scheme, what you find is that some persons who received the water before no longer receive water, because what's happening is that the supply, pipes are there, but the supply is not there because the demand is growing. And certainly this whole planning exercise we'd like to see would sort of keep pace, so you would get more supply as you get more houses built. There was a discussion before on what approvals are needed, and those of us who have done developments or anything like that realize that you have to go through a process of seeking permission, and there are a lot of conditions. One of those conditions is availability of water. The first question I'd ask has two parts. One, if the Water Commission is involved in that process. NEPA is now going to say that we're building this housing development in St. James, and it's going to have 1,000 houses. It's going to affect the amount of water everybody's going to get, because there are many people who are already on the grid who are at their limit. One, do you then say to them, it's going to be difficult to do this, because if you do this, it's going to affect the customers that are there? And two, do you in those cases then say that there are certain things, if you're going to build this development, it must have a water tank, or it must have water harvesting, or some other conditions that it must have, Because if not, what's going to happen is going to affect all those other persons who were there before, and those other people who have Member Clark and Member Jackson and speed dial now start calling and asking, saying, I don't have water, but I had water 2-3 years ago. Is it something that you actively engage in, and is there a policy around this?
Thank you, Chairman. A very timely question, because it touches on a number of areas, and not just only with government agencies who are involved in development, but ordinary or regular developers as well. So to answer your first question, yes, NWC participate in the approval process, and we are required to give our comments on the application / development that may be proposed. The other part of the question, and Chairman, if you will just permit me to just elaborate a little bit. One of the challenges faced by NWC is that oftentimes decision as it relates to where development are taking place is made, and then NWC comes at the back end to see where water should be. Now, I'm saying this in the context that what is lacking right across the length and breadth of Jamaica, albeit it is now been in the planning stage, is that we need to have a proper spatial plan that will consider not just only water, what your transportation needs are, and how will your transportation needs be addressed for the next 20, 50 years, what your telecommunication requirements are, what your power supply electricity requirements are. So we have often done planning and development kind of in a quasi-reverse order. And so a lot of times pressure is born on NWC to respond, to develop a system, to provide water when our budget would have already approved months before. It is not automatically adjusted in that way, because where there are challenges in finding financing to do even what you have already budgeted, how can a NWC provide that financing to do the level of upgrading? So I'll answer that in that context, Chairman. But to answer your other part of the question is, we have often looked at some of the developments. We have made recommendation on a number of occasions to what needs to be done to improve the distribution system, or even in some instances improve facilities to the developers. Invariably, there's always hesitancy and more or less resistance on developers to participate or even to undertake those activities. And therefore, the reliance now is on NWC. And I can understand the argument. We're bringing you new customers, so you're going to collect over time. But the point is, you need a service now. And I don't have the resources now. So those are some of the things. The other thing that I wish to respond to as it relates to water catchment, rain harvesting. It's something internally, although there is no strict policy internally of NWC now, but we have had that discussion as it relates to particular developments that we now are likely to start to consider whether or not those developments consider rain harvesting as part of their proposal. And so the parish council, I know, will be focusing heavily on that, but it is in the water policy. There you go. So it is now in the water policy that is being finalized.
Yeah, but I mean, and I strongly want to advocate for this. Point I'm making is that you have two general types of development, sort of a NHT housing agency, the sort of government and joint partnerships, bigger developments. But you have other developments, some of them quite big too, but those are difficult to capture in a spatial plan because a lot of these persons, it depends on the land they own. So I'll purchase a piece of land with the understanding that I can build a housing development there. So building out this plan is critical. but it's only part of it. I think a lot can be done if, whether it's NHT, any of those, or private developers, if there are already shortages, you must put in place those other conservation exercises within the development that are going to affect everybody else, because you're passing the buck, so to speak. And I would say, I mean, just on a parochial question, in I think July, August of this year, there was some discussion in Westmoreland, the Roaring River supply. Aren't we supposed to be expanding that to give us enough supply? Is that something that's going to happen?
It is something that we're working on actively, Chairman. As you know, these things takes a little time, because one of the approach, again, you finance projects, is usually NWC relies heavily on concessionary loans through multilaterals guaranteed by the government of Jamaica. That situation, or that dynamics, if you will, has changed somewhat. So we have to look how else can we execute these projects. And so what we are pursuing now is more of a build, own, operate type of arrangement, where we become bulk purchasers of the commodity to supply areas, rather than necessarily we find the initial capital investment. But it is something that we're working on actively, and I would expect sometime during next year there should be some final decision on that, early next year.
Well, I say this because right now we're having a problem. There's a NHT scheme in my constituency that they're trying to turn over, but already they're turning over the scheme and there's no water in the scheme. In other words, our difficulties getting water, half the time there's no water, it only comes at night, but it's affecting everybody else as well. And in the process, they're building other schemes as we speak. Now, we all want the development, we want the houses, and a year and a half ago I suggested that isn't one of the things you could do is the housing trust that are involved in it. Is there some arrangement that can be made for them to help with the capital, because they can't be just building houses, no water, turning them over, and then the pressure now goes to everybody else, including yourself, because everybody's calling and saying, I have a house without water. There must be, they're the same customers. There must be something. And secondly, again, in these schemes, one of the things that we have suggested to the housing trust is if they had said to the persons in the scheme, if as part of the house, that put, if it was even a black tank on the houses, it would have made a huge difference. But the problem is that they don't do it voluntarily. And again, one wonders if the National Water Commission, if you are signing off on it, then there must be some responsibility on you to say, put these things in place, that will make a difference. All right, if it's a question, because I have a member, Clark, and I have, and yourself, so.
I'm still waiting on the answer to the White Mall water supply that is out in that area, going into Portmore. But before I do so, I remember very clearly that the Building and Town Planning Act at the Parish Council, this speaks to, one, making sure that when you're doing a development, you have NEPA on board, National Water Commission on board, fire on board, before they can approve plans for development. Does that change? I want to find out if it has changed, because, hearing from you now with the kind of way in which it is going on, I need to know. I want to know too, what role does the housing development, because I was told that sometimes the plans leave the parish council, now they call it the municipalities, and they approve at housing. And they said most times that is what caused the problem because the procedures are not followed. I am not certain. I would like to find out if that is so. You can say. What I would really want to find out again is in regards to the water, because I'm just saying everything because the chairman might not want me to speak again. The water quality inspectors no chairman, very good. The water quality inspectors that you have, do you have adequate amount of water quality inspectors? Because I've noticed most times, especially when the water, when you lose your water by way of, again, electricity. Why is it that when the electricity goes, the water goes with the electricity? The light comes back and the water never comes back. But in regards to after the water comes back, it is muddy in a condition whereby I don't believe it can be used for domestic purposes.
Okay. Thank you, Member Daly. So the first question, Mr. Chairman, is involved and is regards to NWC's involvement in the development process. NWC does participate in the development process from the perspective of our involvement in providing both water and sewage services. So once the developer is intended to connect into our sewage system, we are involved. If they intend to access potable water from our network, we are involved. Or even if they intend to develop, say, a well source to be later turned over to the NWC, we are involved. So we are involved in that process. The other matter as it relates to Whitehall water supply and White Marl. So we have a series of wells that we operate in White Marl, and some of that water is distributed within the White Marl area, and I would say majority, yes, would come into Kingston to join with the ferry system, serving both downtown, etc., and Boulevard. There might be the issue as it relates to one of your community, and that has to do with the level of infrastructure that may be there as it relates to the distribution system. And that could be part of what is creating the challenges in terms of reliability of service. On the matter of water quality, NWC, and I'm going to twin both in terms of power supply, return of power, no return of water. Now, majority of our system does not have a standby generator. It is. And therefore, that can be improved with an increased capital spend. And again, that capital spend would have to come through the revenue from those who choose to pay NWC on time, in full, on a monthly basis. Or if I take a loan, that loan would have to be paid back through that same means. And therefore, you can see where the challenge is as it relates to trying to put standby at every location. Secondly, once the electricity goes, you will have a little bit of water in your pipe, except if you're on the higher elevated areas when you would eventually lose, but you are going to lose water soon thereafter, and you're not likely to get the water immediately as the electricity returns. Electricity and water are completely two different commodities altogether. And one flows through a conduit, one flows through a conductor, which is quite much easier and is instantaneous. Thanks, Peter. But the issue for me that you raise, which is more concerning, is the quality of the water. Once One of the solutions to that is regular flushing of the network, because again, once you have a network that is easily broken, you're going to likely to have some intrusion in your pipe, and so to eliminate that is through a series of flushing that has to be done. We do water quality sampling on a daily basis from those sources. By virtue of the fact that the population size that is served, it mandates us that those sources, both source and distribution, has to be sampled on a daily basis. In addition to that, the public health department as well do their own independent verification as it relates to water quality. So while there would be some level of turbidity as a result of high turbulence that may be created in the pipes, in essence, the water quality as it relates to microbial quality is always one of the best.
Follow up.
To Member Daly. You speak to the matter of specific areas that you're involved as it relates to housing development. 3 specific areas you mentioned. But I was of the view that whenever there's a housing development, the local authorities normally request from you a recommendation as it relates to water. Right. So I don't think they really ask you for any specific. You make a general recommendation, and if those areas in which you do not have NWC service, then you would make your recommendation as to what could work otherwise. And I know that in the new building code, there are new recommendations now and in the code to provide for water when there is no NWC supply. So I would love for you to sort of elaborate on that as to how that works.
Okay. As it relates to the approval process, and it happens through a number of approaches. So the developer may choose for expediency to submit concurrently as they would do at the parish council and at NWC at the same time. So we at some point will get a application for water or sewage services, but predominantly for water services. The parish council usually, or the municipal councils now, would not normally proceed unless they get a response from the NWC as it relates to that, yes. And our response is usually, if it's an inquiry, which developers would do from time to time before they get into their detailed work, is to inquire whether or not the services are available. If the services are available, after our assessment, we will indicate same. They will use that correspondence at the parish council. However, it should be noted, the indication of availability is not an approval, because the approval needs to now go through a rigorous assessment to ensure that infrastructure that is required to support the development will be in place. So a lot of times there's this misconception as well, that once you give a letter to indicate that the services are available, it is considered as the approval, but it is not, because we would not have gone through the detailed design and all the other intricacies relating to a developer prior to that letter that we would have issued. But yes, we do provide that comment.
But the local authority normally rely on
your recommendation to proceed with the approval, because that's how it works. They are not going to give an approval for a development unless the NWC respond to their request. Because what happens is that, as Member Daly said, when a development comes into the local authority, they will request recommendations from all agencies, including the Fire Department, NEPA, Water Commission, NWA, and they will rely on your response in order to proceed with the development. That is my understanding.
Thank you.
Yes, I will.
Member Witter, I guess that would be the normal course of action, but if I sit here and say it always happen, I would not be saying it accurately, but it does not always happen.
Thank you. Members, let me apologize for the absence of our chairman. He had a previous engagement, and so he had to leave. So I am your chairman interim for the time being. Before I take Member Clark and Jackson, one day Busher, you're right, experience Jackson. But I just want to find out from Mr. Barnett. We had a lovely meeting in Mandeville, and I really enjoyed your breakfast. I'm coming to you, sir. But I would want to find out, though, what plans are there for the South Manchester water development, the people in Cross Keys, in Plowden, in other areas in Porous, where we have the Hampton Road supply. They have suffered long and hard, and they have waited for years. I have expended tremendous amount of resources from my CDF trucking water to these areas. What plans are there, sir, and is there a timeline to get some water in those areas? Thank you.
I was just quickly trying to peruse my list, but I was just reliably informed that we do in fact have been executed, albeit that we're just now just about to start evaluate the tenders for the material for the Cross Keys. There's a project that we spoke about on Wednesday. That material procurement has commenced, and we are now in the evaluation stage for those material. Just to point out, the labor contract was already procured, and we just need to reactivate once we have the material. So we expect, all things being equal, sometime during the coming calendar year, 2019, that work will commence on that project to help to alleviate and improve service in that section of southern Manchester.
Sir, we're quite hopeful. Member Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to something that was said by Mr. Barnett. You gave us a breakdown of 70% of all that you produce that you're losing, not paid for. And out of that 70%, you give us a sub-breakdown, which is 60-40. The 60, you say, is commercial systems, and that includes leakage. My question, first question, Mr. Chairman, is why is it then that if you are thus aware of this loss, why is it that it takes so long for NWC to address leakages? That's one question. Two, how much are we, and when I say we, I'm speaking of NWC now, encouraging water harvesting in more rural areas where you may not have the system in place or up to standard? Three, how much are we looking at independent supply? And when I say independent supply, for example, in some communities, you may have a spring or a riverhead or what they call it, entombed spring to make it more accessible to the community? And 3, why is it that, being that you are a part of the whole planning situation, or you're brought on board when there is a large development, how is it that, why is it that you now accept the UPVC pipes rather than the galvanized pipe, which is give you a longer term plus less able to break? And also, we understand that Jamaica has quite an extensive network of informal settlement. And you and I, from St. James days, understand what informal settlement gives. Is it cheaper to leave it as it is, or to get your compliance department into gear? For the Negril areas, or let's say the North Coast, where we're having that influx of large commercial clients, have we thought about getting the Negril River and all of those smaller rivers in the Hanover area to bring them into one network to supply just the Negril area, or the lower section of Hanover that is adjoining to the Negril area, to supply just a commercial area? Have we ever thought of that? And last, why is it that when tanks are being placed in the different large development, that they are placed at a point where they cannot supply the residents, because the residents are always higher than the tank?
Member Clark, it's a long list, but I'm going to take them one by one, Chairman, if I'm permitted. So I'm going to do it the reverse order. In NWC, we have, in looking at, in assessing development, we do what we call hydraulic assessment of the development to make a determination as to where the demand is versus where you place a tank to supply that demand. And I'm pretty sure in all our current assessment, the recommendation to place tanks in a development is usually at the highest point that will command enough pressure to serve every single person in that development. I will hasten to say, though, there are some developments that would have happened many years ago, and I know of a few even in St. James too, that because the original development did not consider the land beyond where the tank would have been installed to serve a particular development, people would develop beyond those tanks. And that could very well be a situation where persons are beyond where a tank is, living there, and create that other challenge. But rest assured, what we are doing, and especially if it's a single lift situation, meaning one pump station to one tank, the tank serves the community, that tank is at the highest elevation that's to serve the development. Commercial customers, Negril, the decision has been taken to look at the Roaring River water supply system to improve water supply to Negril. In 2008, we had developed the Logwood system, which we, at the time, the assessment indicate that it would have been sufficient to serve the population and at the rate at which it was growing then. That has since changed to some extent. And so our decision in NWC is to develop the Roaring River water supply system that will do two things: improve water supply to Negril and improve water supply to Savannah Lamar. Because we have two adjoining commercial areas that requires improved service. And Roaring River, based on the assessment, has adequate capacity to support the improvement and the quality, as Peter had indicated. And then the other systems, the Lago, the Venture River, etc., would also provide some complementary support to that system. The question relating to informal settlement, the answer straight out, we cannot leave informal communities as they are. People must start to demonstrate a social responsibility to pay for the services that they receive, irrespective of their situation or land tenure. It is unacceptable. And this is something that I really feel very, very passionate about. We have this mentality that everything should be free. Water is the cheapest commodity. Albeit if you waste it, it's going to cost you it is going to be high. But if you are responsible enough to be getting water wherever you are, whether it is informal or otherwise, pay for it. We will go into communities and attempt to regularize people, and we are chased out of communities. No, we can't live in a society that encourages this level of anarchy and disobedience at all. And so NWC, not being a social, anthropological establishment, do have its challenges. But we are very mindful that every single person will benefit from the service. And I just interject here, Mr. Chairman. A lot of the complaints that legitimate customers have, is not as a result of NWC's per se deficiency, but it is the selfish behavior of those who choose to steal and continue to steal. And it creates its own challenges for me. And so I have to accept the fact that I have a challenge, because legitimate customers who are getting services intermittently aren't getting it because of those type of action. My simple word is it cannot continue. NWC is not going to tolerate that type of thing for much longer. We're going to go in there and we're going to make every effort to regularize these customers. If you allow me, Member Eli Clark.
Before Mr. Chairman, it is for that same reason that I asked you the question.
Yes. Because
I do understand that and know that you have a compliance department that deals with that part of it. I am in Montego Bay. I do have 77% informal settlement under my portfolio. So I understand what is happening. But I'm yet to see that the compliance personnel out there on a regular basis doing what needs to be done. Because I do agree with you, because what it does is that it affects the formal settlement. For example, a Rosehide situation versus a Rosemount Garden situation. You understand me? So I am on the same page where you are. But I need to see compliance, the department, those personnel who we can identify, we know them because of how the situation is set up. We need to see them out there more. Because again, because we are not paying for the water, then we don't need to fix a leaking pipe. But then again, if those who are supplying the water, not fixing the leak, then why should I, who is receiving the water, fix it? And I could go into a full book where that is concerned.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, just the UPVC. Now, they are in establishing a water supply system. You can use various material. You have high-density polyethylene. UPVC is a regular PVC pipe, as we call them. Ductile iron. Cast iron was one that was used many years ago. Asbestos was used many years ago. Galvanized pipe. So I just want to answer. UPVC has a similar, or said, we operate based on a particular specification. And specification is really how the pipe perform under certain conditions within the network or within your operation. PVC perform just as well as a ductile iron pipe based on the specification, and the specification dictate the operating condition of the pipe. So you'll have SR 20, SR 21, whatever the different, as usually the code. But importantly, when we're doing project, cost is also a major factor. And we have to look at that as well. Cost plus the application, meaning where am I going to run that pipe? There are certain places, yes, PVC would not be suitable because it is rocky and etc. etc. You use other material. But it all depends. And so decisions are taken based on the application and the operating situation that the pipe is going to be subject to during its normal operating life. And again, costs.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Barnett.
Mr. Member Clark, because we have a list of speakers, you know.
I know, Mr. Chairman, but when you look at 77% informal, you know I have problems. Mr. Barnett, the reason for me to ask a question, and I'll use the Rosites area again as an example, because you know it is very large. And the development that took place some years ago went to, no, it speaks to wider, but we're using an example. The UPVC pipes that were used in that area, the joints, you use a rubber to make the connection. But when the water is not flowing through the pipe over an extended period of time, what happened with the heat underground? It's crystallized. And then we start to have more leakage underground than what is actually going into the customer's yard. So it was for that reason why I am asking, or I'm concerned that maybe you might want to look. We can't be penny wise and pound foolish. That's all I'm saying with that.
The point is noted, except that most of our pipes that are laid, except for galvanized, which are threaded ends, ductile iron is rubber gasketed joint push fit, and PVC is just a similar. So a similar occurrence could very well happen with ductile iron. But the point is, water usually should be in the pipe. In the event that it is not, but it's not expected to not be there for any prolonged, extended period of time, so much so that the pipe becomes as if it is pumping hot air to crystallize the joint. The independent suppliers, Mr. Chairman, we have to be careful as an NWC and independent supplier. We are encouraging large-scale independent suppliers to the NWC, but in terms of a single person who may just be serving 20 households, that would not be attractive to us at all. So we wouldn't engage in those type of arrangement at all, because that would create other issues. The last question, if I may default to my other colleague who is responsible for some of these initiatives pursued through the ministry, which is Rural Water Supply Limited, as it relates to rain harvesting, etc., etc. I'm not sure the first question.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. I'm from Rural Water Supply Limited. I'm the Managing Director. I'm Audley Thompson. I'm a General Manager Engineering with us, Mr. Douglas Wilson. Rural Water Supply main mandate is to do development of rural water supply systems. The water sector policy defines the service in two areas, utility service area and non-utility service areas. Non-utility service areas are areas that is not commercially viable for the NWC, right? This makes up approximately 15% of the total population. And we are basically carrying out studies. We call it Rural Water Supply Development Strategy, in terms of what we are doing an island-wide surveys, in terms of where we are mapping all of these non-utility service areas and coming up with solutions in conjunction with the municipal corporations. We have done several parishes already, and we hope to complete this in 2019. Right? Some of these modalities of supply encompass like rainwater harvesting. Or take, for instance, areas like St. Anne, Manchester, St. Elizabeth, and things. There are a lot of catchment tanks. We did a survey and found out that there are approximately 282 catchment tanks island-wide. We have earmarked on a program, island-wide program, over 3-4 years now, in which we are basically rehabilitating catchment tanks that do have on in a roofing. We come up with innovative solutions of ferrocement covers and things like that, right? Also, a lot of these areas you have spring sources, right? You might go to a district and you find that a district have about 1,000 people, and there's a spring source. What we do, we develop this system and basically try to carry service to everybody, every house, right? What we are embarking on is solar pumping, because what you find happen, a lot of these rural areas, if you are to put an electrical supply like an electrical pump, the GPS bill become prohibitive, and these systems normally shut down, right? So we're basically doing like solar pumping systems, and in some instances where solar cannot work, in terms of sometimes you have some shaded areas where the spring sources are, we have to use like petrol pumps, right? And what we're trying to encourage, either we hand over these systems to the municipal corporation, or we set up benevolent societies in these areas where the community basically will manage their own system, right? We would give the necessary training and all of that. Part of the water sector policy, the new water sector policy that is coming out, is giving Rural Water Supply Limited a mandate to ensure that we give whatever support services to these benevolent society, the municipal corporations, to ensure that these systems are maintained. Because one of the things you find happening sometimes when government spend money and rehabilitate a rural system, in a year or two, it runs down to nothing at all. So we are going to be given the mandate to actually keep on visiting these systems. If the municipal corporations are not functioning or maintaining them, we'll basically write them, right?
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Member Jackson. Member Jackson. Yeah, I have a list. Okay, you're kind.
I thank my colleague, Member Jackson, very much. Water is not a luxury. Water is life. And I've listened carefully to the discussions this morning, and everybody knows I'm passionate about water. I manage a constituency where water is a major problem. But you know, I've listened to the discussions this morning. And in life, they say you get what you pay for. I'm interested in the water policy when it comes out, because Mr. Thomas, it will allow me to focus clearly on where we are going with water in terms of the policy. But you get what you pay for. Mr. Barnett said this morning, we have to look at those of us who get our water bills and we pay a little of it, or we pay half this month because then we will wait and pay the next half next month. We don't pay fully. It is what you pay for, it's the money that you're putting that is going to be utilized first. And my colleague said in his informal settlements, he would like to see more of the compliance officers out on the road. Now, I have a little different view on that, because even in my constituency, and I say it openly because people know what I have, sometimes they say, Miss D, they not bush you, so you know, see up here, so not bush. Government not bush you, so if it not bushing, that mosquito go and come and eat you and give you whatever it is you're going to get. Can you go ahead and bush it yourself? Because you're looking about your own welfare. And what has happened, a lot of us as politicians, the same people that coming to us about the water, and the same people that are complaining about the water, many of them don't pay their bills. Many of them will give them and them have the trucks going through delivering water. Some people grab everything for themselves. Some of the very water trucks come and try to sell the water that is for free distribution along the place. So I don't know. I think we need a culture change in terms of our people and what we have. They have to learn. I know I'm from rural Jamaica, and you're right. You put up some systems in there, or you put up the black tanks, And you put them on a nightstand, and now we have to start grilling them because you put them up tonight and tomorrow morning one missing because them thief one and the community is without water. You get a system and we are not carrying it. And I believe that as persons in the community, we need to start telling people, you have to care for the things. The money that we're paying for compliance officers could go into funding the thing. Why should we have people paying people to help you to comply with what should be there? That money could be better utilized. We need, no, but what I'm saying, remember, I'm saying we need to say to our people, listen man, we need to stop thieving the water because it's not paying. And then the money that you're paying for compliance officers can go into something that is more productive. I want water, you know, and I see the problems, and I am not totally happy with everything. That's why I'm anxious to see what the water policy is. But I also do believe that a lot of us are not carrying the water systems that are put in the areas. A lot of us do not pay our water bills on time, or we pay half and don't pay half. And if you ask me, why should I fix a leak? Why should I fix a leak? Because if I don't fix it and I don't have no water in my place, I'm going to, disease going to break out on me. So I'm saying we have to also look, because like I say to people, them say, Miss D, what if we do, me have so much picnic? Government never sent us to have 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 children. So we do have a responsibility as well. So that for me, what has come out of the discussion, and that is very important to me, Mr. Thompson, is your department and what we're going to hear. What is the water policy? How is it going to affect us all as Jamaicans? And I'm saying all of us, politicians, all of us have to now help to change the mindset with people that we also have a responsibility to protect and care the systems that are put into place, to tell our own people when they are quarrel, say, me no have no water, are to make the change, and in fact, and that will endure to the benefit of all of us as Jamaicans. So I really look forward to the water policy, but I don't subscribe to spending too much money on compliance officers. I think we need to institute a response to our people so that we all become compliance officers. Stop thief the water, pay for the water, do this, do that, so that generally you will have a turnaround in the system. Thank you.
Thank you, member. But before you respond, Mr. Barnett or Mr. Thompson, what is the penalty for stealing water? And why are you not as aggressive as, say, the JPS in pursuing persons who tap into your water system?
Chairman, I really want to express NWC's and myself's appreciation to the remarks from Member Dalrymple Filbert. And it is in fact correct, because we have looked at what it would cost to incur additional costs just to collect the revenue. And, you know, for an enterprise that is already experiencing so much losses and to add more costs, it's really a challenging decision in that sense. But it's something, as I said, we are relentless to do. We may not necessarily be in every area, but I'm sure one of the approaches that we're taking is a little softer approach through community meetings with the people as a means of tackling the issue. Because the heavy-handed brute force, it's just not going to work. It doesn't work for others, and I don't see how it is going to work for NWC.
Yes, member. I have member Dunn was on the list before you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm from Southeast St. Mary, I represent the people of Southeast St. Mary. And Southeast St. Mary is what is called a regulated water system. This regulated water system, if it works well, would guarantee them the services on the day that it is supposed to come. But we have seen in not just recent times, but in times past, that this has not worked very well. We have a number of water sources in the area. Christians is one of our major water sources, and I remember last year or year before last, talks were with Jamaica producers to develop the Agwalter Vale water well. If this system comes on track, especially Agwalter Vale and the new Krisha system, couldn't we have a situation where this regulated water system is a thing of the past? So I want to know, number one, is the Agwalter Vale system going to be commissioned so that we can get the service? And number two, the Krisha system, has that been commissioned? And if yes, when can we get additional water from that particular source? And before you go on, one other question. In Richmond area, there's a system called the Rock Spring system. The Rock Spring system that has been out of water for some time now, and or when there's a lot of rain, there's high turbidity. But one of the issues is that that system is continuously out of water. Number one, is there any other alternate source that can be looked for that particular area? Or if the systems are upgraded, then that area could actually get water from the Cromwelland system.
Thank you, Member Dunn. So yes, it is in fact correct. As the major source that serves the entire area is the Itaborale Agwalter Vale water supply system, which means we have we usually operate a spring source really at Itaborale, and from there we distribute into the other communities via Agwalter Vale. Now, one of the things that we have done, and two things, and I'll give you as much as possible the information relating to the water supply improvement scheme for that area. But in 2015, 2016, you may be aware that there was a severe drought that impacted the entire area. And so NWC, through its own resources, utilized temporarily a well that was loaned to us by one of the entrepreneurs in the area. And secondly, we took the decision to drill an additional source in close proximity to the Itaborale system. That is one aspect of the improvement within that area. So if the spring goes low, the well provides additional flow. Now, one of the things that we are faced with, so we had more capacity as we would have now, and I think probably it's just about 1 million or more gallons of water that we have added to move. And my team will tell me that, okay, so we have this, the transmission main was never designed for that. So I need to have another project to move water supply from Itaborale because you have the volume. We have developed the source to increase the transmission capacity all the way to Agwalter Vale, and you can imagine the cost of that. Secondly, the alternate that we were pursuing, and because of some breakdown in the whole arrangement, which we have been now trying to reactivate, is to develop a series of wells within the Agwalter Vale area itself, meaning in some of those old farming area. We have identified those wells. I think we have tests, and rural water we engaged rural water to undertake those activities on our behalf at that time. But again, the other thing is to install a transmission main, rather than going the original route that we're now distributing, is to take it a different route so that it can actually improve the reliability. We are still in discussion with an entity to support the project. The project at last estimate is about $700 million to undertake that exercise. And we hope, based on whatever collaterals that we can provide, to satisfy the entity, then we can actually move on that project because it is already designed. It was already down the pipeline, but because of the financial constraint, we just could not move to do that comprehensive improvement. But in the interim, through our own resources, we were able to develop the other wells so as to ensure, at least in the worst situation, we don't have a crisis that reoccur as it did in 2015. As I said, the only determining, the only factor for us now is how do we tie up that finance with the entity who has demonstrated some interest in having it done, and that's what we're doing.
Member Daly.
Sorry, Member Daly.
A follow-up.
You have a timeline for that, Mr. Barnett?
It's our intention that we will. So if I give you exactly, we have the agreements drawn up. So we are hoping that sometime 2019 we can tie up that financial aspect, and then we will move to the whole commencement of the process. Yeah, but we expect to tie up all of those by 2019. Yeah.
Member Daly.
Thank you very much, Chairman. In regard, Mr. Thompson, in regards to the areas that you have investigated so far, is it too much for you to name them so that I'll be able to know if there is any area that I have any concern with? And two, in terms of your budget, do you operate on the budget that you get in terms of collection, or do the government give you the budget for minor water supply in regards to more so what you use to do maintenance? And before you answer, Mr. Barnett, I want to find out from you if the program that you used to have or should have in regard to after the road has been dug up by the NWC, they used to put aside a portion of money, whether through the municipalities or to NWA to do back the repairs. Is that still in place? I would really want to find out.
Should I go first?
All right, make I go first, Mark. Okay. All right. Member, in relation to, I hear you had mentioned Windsor Heights. In the past, we had installed a solar pumping system to supply the upper areas. Is it still working properly? All right. In relation to Glades, you mentioned Glades. We did some investigation in the past as it relates to Glades, but we haven't been able to get the financing for it. Glades can be supplied from the Sligoville system coming through the hills. That's how it used to be supplied, right? And in relation to our budget, all right, that you hear us say our budget could be better on an annual basis, right? Because we have a lot of projects to do, but the budget support has not been that fruitful in the years, because we only got 100 million this year, and $100 million for the whole island that have challenges in terms of rural systems, right? But we utilize it as best as we can to implement, because we're basically an implementing agency to implement as much as we can.
And to address the question that relates to NWC and road repairs. So one of the things that we have done, and it's always good that you have a predecessor who understands the whole issue as it relates to NWC activities. And so we currently have a working agreement arrangement that is funded, regularly funded with the NWA, who are responsible, and although their focus now would be in corporate area and their major road thoroughfares, is working pretty well. I can say that it is working. But what we have also done, just to expand the whole issue, is to we started to make interaction with the municipal councils. We have, in an effort to see how we can do a similar arrangement, we shared with them a draft agreement. Some have indicated interest, but we have not been able to move to the level of putting ink to paper because we want to establish a similar arrangement. In fact, one of my operational activity in enhancing the corporate image of the NWC is our responsiveness to road repair, because we see that as a negative to our corporate image. And so that is one of the reasons we have opted not to even think that we are road repairers, but engage those who are better suited to do that activity. And so we are awaiting the other entities that are so entrusted to do those activities to come on board with us, as we have been seeing very good results from the NWA collaboration.
Just a quick follow-up. Why you should not have cooperation when you have the funding? I'm trying to figure out, because the roads that have been dug up is roads that were repaired both by parish count, the municipality, and NWA. So why is it that you have the funding? Something is not adding up. Something is wrong. So I really need to get some more clarity on that, because it's really leaving some mixed feeling in my head right now in regards to why you'd have the funding and why is it that they are not coming on board with you. And that's supposed to be a policy-driven decision. I remember that clearly, that it was the policy that once you do your repairs, damage the road, you should have the budget in place, and the technical persons should be able to go out and do the repairs, not months after, not weeks, but as soon as the thing is settled and is ready for repair, it should be done, because those funds should be put aside. If I'm not correct, I would want you to correct me.
In responding to that, while we would have initiated that, and in fact, the municipal council's meetings that I would have attended, this very same matter has been raised, and we have provided copies of the agreement. What we want is a similar agreement as we would have had with the NWA, because it's no different. And however, the pace at which that response is received is not really in the purview or control of the NWC, but I have expressed it everywhere. We are open to have those arrangements, and we are open to have those arrangements in a similar fashion for the municipal roads as we have now with the NWA. The NWA roads, those are repaired by NWA on our behalf, and we have a system in place where we monitor, we check, etc. It is much improved than what it was before. Yes.
Thank you. Member Jackson, you still want to make your point?
Oh, God, what happened?
No, 7. First of all, let me start by adding my bit of commendation. I've seen visible the improvement on the patching in the corporate area, and it's a far improvement over what it used to be in the past. So I really want to start out by posting my commendation to the NWC. And yes, I agree with it, it's a bad corporate image. So I like that strategy. To where I started with Mr. Thomas and the Bernard Lodge. I just want my simple question, Mr. Barnett. Has the NWC been consulted on the proposed development and how the water and sewage demand for the proposed development will be met going forward? That's one. 2, the NWC did not provide a breakdown of the expenses in the submission. And particularly we want to find out what portion of the expenses goes towards salaries, utilities, debt service, infrastructure repair, maintenance, etc. That's one. That's the second one. I think the earlier on a question was asked regarding the mix of private contractual engagement as against your own in-house work, mainly like the repair work. Because the ones that end up this, well, what portion of your maintenance work is internal capacity as against external capacities? Earlier on in your opening remarks, Mr. Barnett, you mentioned about the financial challenges that you face and elaborate on it in further responses. So much so that your pension liabilities you have a challenge with. One of your major, in other words, your ability to honor the pension obligations of your former and current employees. And I juxtapose that with the fact that a lot of your refinancing of foreign currency debt was as a result of a recent bond issue. What, 15 billion? When I made some checks at the time, subsequent to the announcement in the House, that arrangement you entered into with NCB Bank, NCB organization, based upon what was transpiring in the market at the time, that bond issue is going to cost ratepayers over $6 billion more than what the BOJ costs of a similar amount in the market at the time. So there's a $15 billion excess over what was prevailing at the time. And I ask that against the background of the financial strain that you are facing to deal with a critical part of your operating expenses, which is servicing the pension requirement of your employees. And I asked this question to Mr. Barnett with some concern of the process that was engaged in the issuing of that $15 billion bond. My recollection is that you went to the market, or whoever did it on your behalf, and 4 entities were engaged, 2 of which would be disqualified by virtue of their size to deal with the magnitude of the bond that you are seeking. I also have the concern, Mr. Barnett, that this is a long-term financing arrangement. Long-term financing arrangements are usually done through pension fund managers, because those are long-term instruments. And these longer-term instruments have lower interest, lower yield, as against the short-term ones. You did a select after indicating that you were going to go this route. You never executed it until 1 year after. Now, the fact that you did it 1 year after erased any notion of emergency. Now, there are 3 methods in the government for procuring services. One is you do an open bid, selective tender, or third one is emergencies. Direct, sole sourcing. So sole sourcing went out. You engage 4 entities. One of the major pension fund operators in Jamaica and in the region, Sagicor, was never included in that list. Scotiabank, which is the next major one, they said they could not take it up because of the absence of guarantee. NCB becomes the sole one that you negotiated with, excluded the major pension fund operator, negotiated with NCB, and the basis of your accepting that was that they did not require guarantee. Now, Mr. Barnett, my problem is that the NWC, as all of us know, is an essential utility owned by the government that cannot go bankrupt. Cannot go bankrupt. And that's not a notion of mine, because over the years, the government has always underwrite the expenses. So you have an inherent government guarantee implicit. Implicit. Need no explicit written guarantee. Because there's no way any government, JLP or PNP government, could ever allow the NWC to collapse. Not only for supplying water for drinking purposes, but also for health purposes. The country would be in a crisis if the NWC collapsed. So given that implicit guarantee by the government, it might not be in law, but it is, well, NCB took it. But they took charge of a higher rate on the basis that there were no written guarantee. They took it because they knew. And by the way, the chairman of the NWC was also an executive in the NCB organization. So that is a bit of concern of mine.
Mr. Chairman, let me at this point just caution my friend that we're talking about a gentleman who had some history.
Okay, I withdraw that. I withdraw that. I was guided by my legal.
Thank you, member.
Luminary. So you went ahead with that arrangement in the manner that you did. That by all data available, which I can provide, because I went ahead and collected the data, the information, and what was in the market at the time, when BOJ went to the market, what their rate was, what the rate that you settled for at the time. And I will provide it to you to substantiate my concern. Mr. Chairman, I would like the President to give me some clarity on that. Next question, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, may I just, it's a rather lengthy presentation that my friend has made.
No, the other ones are short.
And I would, in fairness to Mr. Barnett, I'd ask that.
You want me to break?
Let him answer, deal with the issues that have been sought.
I yield to that, but he did say he had 7 questions. Yes. Okay.
But I think Mr. Barnett was listing them down anyway. No? I saw him scratching.
It's very. In fact, there's some very serious allegations, if I may so describe them, that are being leveled at the entity. In fact, if I understand him clearly, my friend is saying that the procedure was indeed not. Let me use this expression.
Mr. Campbell, can we hear from Mr. Barnett then? He will clarify.
That it is in fact not in keeping with the established procedures. If indeed that is what my friend is saying, then we certainly, my friend ought to firstly put on the table what he is alleging that was not in compliance with the Jamaican regulation.
I hear you. I hear you.
Sorry, I missed the last point. Not in compliance with?
Well, we have procurement rules.
Okay.
And could you just point Mr. Barnett to where you're saying that the breach took place?
Sure.
Member Jackson? Yes.
No, I did state that I knew that there were 3 established procedures, and the one that he chose, I had the difficulties with, which I outlined.
Well,
so I want his response will give me an explanation why that choice.
It cannot be a matter of his choosing, because you alluded to the fact that there are certain bids that went out, and there are people who were non-compliant. Yes. So if they were non-compliant, then it can't be a matter of non-choosing.
Member Campbell, can we get a response from Mr. Campbell?
No, Mr. Barnett will adequately answer the question.
Mr. Barnett.
The other one. I'm finishing now. Energy costs. It's amount for roughly 30% of your operating costs. And I would love to know what are the steps, if any, being either contemplated or pursued to contain that cost, given electricity is a major part of your operation. Capacity, mainly in respect to sewage and the Soapberry plant. My understanding is that that facility has reached or fast reaching its full capacity. What plans, if any, are afoot for dealing with this? And just to tie back to the first question about the Bernard Lodge, if that is a part of it and where where those plans are. Mr. Chairman, you'll realize that my questions were very brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Jackson. Mr. Barnett.
Thank you, Member Jackson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will attempt to respond to each question, but I'm going to jump into the middle of one of the questions because I think it is only appropriate that the issue regarding NWC pension obligation is contextualized, because I wish not for it to be construed that NWC is unable to pay its pensions. All I'm saying is, under our current arrangement, NWC pays its pension through its operating revenue. That is not a sustainable approach to pension obligation, and therefore we are moving ahead to reform our pension internally so that it becomes compulsory for each and every employee, current and to be employed, will start to contribute. Right. And again, as my PS ably reminded me, as we know how NWC came into being, there was a pension parochial scheme which was the order of business as it relates to pension in NWC. It's a non-contributory scheme from day one. And so that is part of the obligation that is contained in terms of the liability currently. So, right.
Sorry, and just to say that no subsidy was given to NWC to help them to carry that liability. So they are paying out pension to retirees who never contributed, and there's no support from the government to take care of that liability. So it has put a significant strain on their operations and their ability. Yes.
And I appreciate it.
Right. So I'm going to start from the bottom, Mr. Chairman, and if Member Jackson. Okay. So the Soapberry facility, the question really is, what are we doing? As you would recall, we made a strategic decision about 3 years, or about 3 to 4 years ago, to really make a significant intervention to help both in the environmental aesthetics and the health of the people of Portmore. And when I mean Portmore, the original Portmore. And so we took a decision internally to decommission 5 satellite wastewater treatment plants. In fact, one of those facilities was not even NWC owned, but we took it on. We decommissioned Independence City, everybody is aware of that, Waterford. Decommissioned Bridgeport, Hamilton Gardens, and Caymanas Estate, and another one. Now, it does create higher volumes into Soapberry. And yes, based on the treatment technology employed, it would require expansion in very short order. What are we doing about it is that part of the strategy, well, back up a little bit. Soapberry owns by CWTC. CWTC is a subsidiary by virtue of shareholding as it is now of NWC. NWC owns 85% of the shares. A private sector entity owns the remaining portion. We are looking as a means of generating capital to expand, to divest either all or a portion of NWC's shareholding in Soapberry that will allow for the expansion and a greater private sector participation in that activity. That is the strategy that we're pursuing. We're currently undergoing the legal due diligence, the financial due diligence, albeit the financial due diligence aspect of that activity is a little bit delayed, but that is what we're doing through the DBJ as the entity with responsibility for divestment activities. And that is an activity. The enterprise team is chaired by myself with other members from other entities, and so we're pursuing that. The energy, we see an energy water nexus interlink. So INRW, high energy, because you're going to be consuming to generate more water than you need to. We know we're not likely to tackle everything at the same time. So what we're doing the NRW, which we expect to reduce our energy as well. But outside of that, we have attempted through both ourselves and the Petroleum Corporation of Jamaica to pursue renewables, photovoltaic at various locations. In fact, we are also looking at other private entities who have expressed an interest. The challenge that NWC has is simple. Our consumption at individual location is so small that replication of the same system at various locations is not as attractive as it could be for some private enterprises who want to invest. However, we are not taking that as a means of not doing anything. And currently, we're looking seriously at how we can establish a solar photovoltaic farm on the Mona Reservoir. We have just about close over 100 acres of land that space occupies. And the technology is well matured, and that is something that I've gotten interest in, except in this case, rather than NWC operate that system, we may just lease the surface as a means of generating, and whatever revenue now plow back into our energy costs. We're looking at about 30 to 40 megawatts of energy that could be generated there. And then we look at other facilities. But right now, the primary focus to get at least one project going to impact our energy is the Mona Reservoir solar system. We, on the matter of the bond, and I know Member Jackson would be aware that, our most honorable Prime Minister had, responded to a number of questions pertaining to this matter some time ago, and in this very, very honorable House as well. The bond primary purpose was to refinance our high interest US and Euro debt. Those debts at the time were taken on, and legitimately so, because local currency interest rate was way out the roof and foreign currency interest rate was much more attractive then. And so that was the decision of the NWC at the time. Situation changed. NWC suffers just about $7.9 billion worth of foreign exchange loss in the last 5 years prior to that bond. But just to raise the point in terms of the procurement rules, and I'm very mindful of the implication of the accounting officer or the head of agency, which is myself, and I'm the only one, as a famous friend of mine would say, who would wear short pants. I'm the only one inside the NWC who is liable to go to wear short pants. However, we are very much, Chairman, mindful of the procurement guidelines, and in consulting with those guidelines, procuring for financial services, it is not a compulsory of the entity to engage multiple financial advisors to provide a particular service. And so it is not correct to say that there was, it is three. You can go sole sourcing, because just as though you can sole source legal services, financial services is the same. Suffice it to say, we opted to look at various institutions. Yes, you're correct. At the time, Sagicor was not invited. However, Scotia was invited, and Scotia in fact advised that their investment arm would deal with this type of arrangement. When we initially made the submit to NCB, we would have normally made these requests through our client relations personnel. As an entity, we have specific person within that establishment. They direct us, as Scotia did, to their investment arm. And so that is how that process transpired, albeit two of the entities did not respond. Two responded, and one of the things that we did in the initial approach was to engage with entities who would have had financial undertakings with NWC in the past. So at least we have that history and relationship in the financial approach. However, in determining a financial advisor and a transaction advisor, it does not preclude that transaction advisor to do market sounding with other investors. So albeit you per se, Mark Barnett is not the lead in this relationship with the entity issuing the bond, you are not eliminated from that process, because how bond issue works, as far as I understand it, is that you have a lead arranger who will then do that arrangement with other investment houses, and those houses could participate in that bond issue, albeit not being the main arranger in the process. It is a fact that yes, the process started some time ago. I will say to you that because of the approach that we took, and the fact that there was no government expressed guarantee, and I'm using the word specifically because my understanding in the financial market, financial institutions find comfort with a piece of document from government, albeit that, as you indicated, there might be implicit guarantee, but they are more comfortable, and that's my understanding, of having that express guarantee from government. We, through this transaction, did not require or state to the arranger that anybody who are participating will not see an express government guarantee. And obviously, that will create some semblance of risk and how you manage that risk in the whole transaction. And so we, as part of the process, use K-factor funds as part of what, and this is funds generated internally, as part of the surety in the process. And in the same breath, we have to consult with the Office of Utilities Regulation. And in fact, that took some time. It took a very chunk of time before the whole back and forth until we could get the OU. And you know, some of these arrangements, NWC, while executing, some steps within the process are not controlled by a regulated entity. And that's just the process. Now, having done that, we would have taken the process a bit further under the Public Management and Accountability, Public Management Bodies and Accountability Act. Right, thanks, PS. The NWC's Act, although indicated it can take on to itself debt, our Act is superseded by the most current, the PBMA Act. And therefore, anything, if we're even borrowing $1, it has to be approved by the Ministry of Finance. And therefore, any terms arrangement that we would have received from the arranger in terms of this transaction would have gone through that process. And the evaluation at the time presented concurrence with what was offered, and we pursued the bond issue of $15 billion. And just to give the members just a little bit of information as it relates to the tenure, which I know it is already published elsewhere. The full amount is $15 billion. $5 billion is over 40 years. $2 billion is over 20 years. And $8 billion is for 10 years. And the coupon gross rates, and I'm sure that's what Member Jackson is mentioning, coupon gross rates for the 40 years is 13.35%, 20 years 11.4%, and for the 10 years is 10.5% as the coupon gross rates. Now, part of the thing that we have to look at, and when we did our analysis, looking at the rates, looking at the foreign exchange losses that we were incurring, and looking at the demand and cash flow to service this bond, it turned out that we would have been in a net benefit position pursuing these bonds. And so the decision was taken based on those analyses that we pursue, knowing very well the challenges that we have in terms of the foreign exchange losses. And I must just add, Mr. Chairman, NWC would have made about $2 billion loss in one of its financial years. That loss, if you look at it seriously, was attributed singularly to foreign exchange loss. And so it was, and I'm sure Member Jackson is not saying we should not refinance. I would not think so.
Because I fully agree with you. My question was the most optimal route for that refinancing. Okay. So yes, I fully agree with the refinancing and the increase in cost from the exchange rate movement. But just for further clarification, which entity was the arranger for this?
The arranger for the bond is NCB Capital Markets.
NCB Capital Markets was the arranger.
Yeah.
What was the period given when the invitation was sent out and for the responses? Was it about 10 days?
It was about that, yes. And as again, Mr. Chairman, Member Jackson, there's no compulsory of even giving up tender period. You could have just selected a financial house and say, but yes, I know you could, 10 days. Yeah.
You only for a magnitude, a bond in the magnitude of $15 billion. You only gave 10 days for any of the interested party to organize a response for this.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir.
No, I just want to clarify for the record.
Okay.
Mike?
I wasn't clear on the last question on the maintenance.
But I think maybe in part you had.
I addressed it.
Yes, regarding your internal capacities.
Yes.
For much of the work you engage as against what you have to engage externally.
So just to, we have to evaluate how we operate on a regular basis. And we have identified some areas of the business that we believe could be better done by others. And in fact, one of that area that it wasn't even something that we wanted to do initially, but we were just forced to do it because we want to use our greater impact of technology in how we get to our customers. And so in very, very short before the end of this year, we are pursuing outsourcing our bill print e-billing system because it is something that we believe is a greater benefit to the NWC and is a business sensitive matter, and any hiccup that we have in that process impact both my collection and revenue and financial spend. But we are looking at different areas, and some of the areas is going to be influenced by technology. I spoke about the meters that we have installed, and that is predominantly geared towards ensuring that you can sit in your living room and you get your meter readings, you know when there's a high consumption on your premises, rather than you having to call me 30 days after you have gotten the bill. That's where I am trying to take the NWC.
I can say I've had that experience.
Yes, that's where I'm trying to take the NWC, Mr. Chairman, so that it becomes not responsive but proactive, and customers can feel that the entity is serving them rather than they feel as if they are being patronized in any way. But it will take some time. The issue on the Burnham Lodge, NWC is part of that consultative process, and where our approach as it relates to supporting that development is consistent with what Mr. Thomas had indicated. However, we are very much cognizant of the limitations of the aquifers within that area, and therefore I believe the greater focus possibly is how do we expand possibly the current PPP that we are aggressively pursuing to harness water from the Ryakobri to actually help in that process. Secondly, we recognize the sensitive nature of sewage and sewage treatment in Portmore. It is not lost on us. We have no intention of moving the sewage from Burnham Lodge into Soapberry. Soapberry, based on the historical background, is predominantly for this side of the KMR. We believe in two things. One, we don't want to have a number of satellite wastewater treatment facilities in any given area because it is just difficult to manage. And secondly, where we are moving is for, having completed the rehab, which we are actively pursuing, is for the expansion of the greater Portmore system to accommodate that development. So we will end up with just 2 wastewater treatment systems within that urban area.
You are contemplating increasing greater Portmore treatment
expanding
for the 17,000
expanding.
Expanded.
Not rehab, rehab. Sorry.
Well, you have optimized the rehabilitation already for the 2,000 from Gores. So just two follow-up questions in regard to that. No, yeah, what you mean, no? In respect to, I know that's the time, I'll let short. The water component, right? In respect to the Bernard Lodge proposed, the NWC's position is that you have to pursue private-public partnership to realize that. Is that, let me clear on that.
Okay, so what we have done, again, with the change in economic circumstances and all the rest of policy guidelines that NWC has to abide by, we have to look at how can we address some of the deficiencies without necessarily breaching, if you will, some of what has been established. And we look at public-private partnership. In fact, the public-private partnership that we're pursuing had started sometime before. I wouldn't say long before, but sometime before the Bernard Lodge development was announced.
Well, I will follow up further with the implementation team on that one.
We know the time, but Member Campbell.
I'll be very quick. Mr. Barnett, on the matter of Soapbury, the discharge from that facility goes where?
The discharge from Soapbury goes into the, let's say, the downflow of the Royal Cobra that goes into the Hunts Bay. And
what's the quality of that discharge?
The quality, some parameters are out, but in a sense, one of the key parameters, the BOD, is substantially in compliance. You would have, I think, the parameter probably would have been total nitrogen may have been out, but all the rest of parameters based on the analysis would be in compliance.
Right. I know this is not your principal focus, but the technology is available, and you may want to consider converting the waste from that into fertilizers, because it's something which is I don't know if that is
so to answer your question, Member Campbell, you are in fact correct. What I failed to have mentioned in my response to Member Jackson, Mr. Chairman, is that part of the overall improvement of the Soapbury would see a more integrated approach to the water resources, meaning if we take more water from the Royal Cobra, the plan is to move water, the treated effluent, to support, and we are believing that the Caymanas Economic Zone, which is well advanced in the planning stage, could benefit from that reuse, and also whatever agricultural activity that may still be happening along that belt, whether it's be Dumby Holding or Hill Run or wherever, could also benefit from that water. And that in itself, if you still do the level of flood irrigation, would have a positive impact as well on the aquifer.
No, it's panel. But the current discharge, would that be able to support agriculture?
Usually, having read some years ago on wastewater reuse, we have to be mindful. Usually when we speak loosely about wastewater reuse. Or wastewater reuse have different categories of uses. And so we have to understand what crop are we talking about. If we're talking about flooding irrigation, fodder type crop, grass cultivation, perfect. If we're talking about crops that are consumed raw, cabbage, etc., absolutely not. It would require some level of additional treatment. But it all depends on the agricultural purpose that we're speaking about.
Thank you, members. Mr. Campbell, I have just two short questions here before we go, mindful of the time. One has to do with the KMR here, the Kingston Metropolitan Area. We have always been having challenges each year. Matters have been discussed as relates to desilting, provision of additional water supply. What is the policy there? And is it the policy of the NWC as it relates to provision of water, where the water source is being sourced from I notice that we normally bypass the areas and go into other areas, and citizens are really, really upset when it comes to that. Is that a policy of the NWC?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, as it relates to the Kingston and St. Andrew area, and one of the major items that has always been raised is the desilting of the Hermitage Dam. Before attempting to do any civil works, one of the first things one will have to do, and we have done it as it relates to the dam, is to do an assessment. And we have engaged consultants with financing from the CDB to do that. They have provided their report, our preliminary report, which I'm not expecting to have much changes really. And the first order of business, as is recommended in that report, is to ensure that the dam is stable. And thereafter you can look at desilting. But I just want to raise the point. Hermitage has a capacity now of just about 400 million imperial gallons of water. And removing the silt based on the estimate that was presented from those reports would cost us probably about 25 million US dollars. We're looking to put up a new water treatment plant on the Ryacobre, which would complement the source or the supply from Hermitage at 37, close to 40 million gallons, million US dollars. And you're looking at a 15 million gallons per day facility. Desilting Hermitage will not give us 15 million gallons additional water per day. And therefore, we have to take decisions that make business sense and create that level of reliability and sustainability and affordability for the NWC. And so that is the approach that we are pursuing now. Albeit we're not saying that other sources cannot be looked at. Those can be. The other question as it relates to producing water in one area, community, and it is not the policy of the NWC to ignore communities. We all understand some of these schemes were developed at those times for particular purposes, and so communities may not have been so populated then. But we have been looking at some of these communities to see how it can be served. A lot of times the communities are in such close proximity to a transmission main which is under 150 psi, 200 psi. It's not going to be an easy tap in and you get water, because that pipe will not last any time. So it's something that we don't have a policy to ignore people, and it's something that we're looking at to ensure that those in close proximity are also served.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Members, we have had a long day, and I believe we have ventilated a lot of the concerns of the country, and we are looking forward to these resolutions as quickly as possible. Let me, on your behalf, members, express sincere thanks and appreciation to the Water Resources Authority.
Mr. Chairman, just one parochial issue. Essex Valley.
You heard it. It's coming on. So I want to thank the Water Resources Authority, National Water Commission, and the Rural Water Supply Limited, PS, and you and your team for coming out this morning and for really ventilating, and because water is life, as we all know, and we're happy for this engagement here this morning. I believe the country has benefited significantly, and I thank you. Members, next week we will have the 5th of December, we will have the Housing Agency of Jamaica appearing. We will also have the National Housing Trust appearing. And so we thank you all. We will now adjourn.
Hi, I'm Neveline Williams-Mills, Jamaica 400 champion, and you're watching PBCJ People's Station.
This is the news on PBCJ. I am Simone Absalom. National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang yesterday responded to concerns on the conditions under which persons are being detained